I was about 9 years old when my parents moved us to the new house. It was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town, the kind of home my mum had always dreamed of. She loved the way the morning sun filtered through the trees and how the nearest neighbors were miles away. To her, it was perfect. A place where we could grow up, surrounded by nature and peace. But there was something about that house that never sat right with me. I didn't know at that time, but decades before we moved in, someone had killed themselves in that house. My parents never mentioned it, and maybe they didn't know. But I think the house did, and it wasn't going to let us forget. The first few weeks were normal enough. We settled in, unpacked, and got used to the new routine. But then, one night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard something strange. At first, it was just a faint noise, like someone whispering. But then it grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like someone gasping for air, followed by a low, raspy screech. I didn't understand what it was, but it sent chills down my spine. I remember telling my parents about it the next morning. They brushed it off, saying it was probably just an animal outside, maybe a raccoon or something. My sister didn't hear anything, and neither did they, so they figured I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. But the noises didn't stop. In fact, they grew worse, night after night, until it felt like the sound was coming from right inside my room. The gasping, the choking. It was as if someone was dying in there, just a few feet away from me. It was always just me who heard it. My parents never did, nor my sister. I started dreading bedtime, knowing that as soon as the house grew quiet, the noises would start again. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. For a few nights, there was nothing but silence, and I started to think that maybe it had all been in my head. Maybe my parents were right, and I had just been hearing things. Then came the night I'll never forget. I was sick, too sick to join my family for dinner, so I stayed in my room, lying in bed, drifting in and out of a feverish sleep. The house was quiet, just the soft clatter of dishes downstairs, the muffled sound of my sister laughing at something. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, something moving in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, and that's when I saw a head peeking around the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was watching me, motionless, just peering in like it was waiting for something. I was too scared to move, to scream, even to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat on my skin, but I couldn't look away. And then the figure stepped into the room. My blood ran cold. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of a man, but something was terribly wrong. His neck was long, unnaturally long, thin and stretched, like a snake twisting out from the collar of his shirt. His face was pale, almost grey, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to bore into me. As he moved closer, I felt like I was going to die. The fear was so intense, I thought my heart would stop. Somehow, I managed to let out a scream, pulling the blankets over my head, trying to hide from the horror that was creeping toward me. My parents rushed in, the lights came on, and just like that, the figure was gone. I was trembling, unable to speak, tears streaming down my face. They kept asking what happened, what I had seen, but I couldn't tell them. Not then. Later, when I calmed down, I tried to explain, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just a nightmare, a bad dream brought on by the fever. But I knew it wasn't. Weeks passed, and I tried to push the memory away, telling myself it wasn't real. But then, one day, my mum saw something that made her believe. She was cleaning my room, dusting the corners, when she screamed. A sound I had never heard her make before. She grabbed my sister and me, and we left the house without a word. She drove straight to my grandparents' place, not stopping until we were miles away. It wasn't until later that night, when my dad joined us, that I overheard what she had seen. She didn't want to talk about it, but I caught bits and pieces. Something about a man with a long neck, standing in the doorway, watching her. We never went back to that house. My parents sold it not long after, and we moved into a small place in town. I found out years later, when I was older and braver, that the previous owner had hanged himself in the very room that had been mine. The same room where I had heard the noises and where I had seen the man with the twisted neck. I don't know if he was the one who had died there, or if the house had somehow twisted his soul into something else. But I know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget the feeling of those empty eyes staring at me. The sound of that awful, rasping breath echoing in the dark.